Welcome to Cockpit Conversations. This is a place where we share tips and strategies for not only getting hired, but getting the most out of your aviation career along the way. Additionally, we'd like to share thoughts on many things that we find interesting at 35,000 feet. Sit back, get comfortable, and welcome aboard.
And greetings to the podcast. This morning, we're talking to Chris Riley. Chris is an interesting cat in that he started his airline career after military at Delta, like a lot of guys, heard the Purple Siren song, came over and joined FedEx for a while, and then made a somewhat unique decision that a lot of other people have been asking me about lately, and that was a decision to return to Delta. It's not an easy transition, a lot of life-changing decisions in a short amount of time. So I thought it'd be fun to get it straight from the horse's mouth. A future podcast, we're going to have Corey Klimko, who basically had a similar track with United Airlines. So for the last several months, I've had quite a few pilots reaching out to me going, am I crazy to consider leaving this airline and going somewhere else? There's 1,000 inputs, 1,000 variables, but I thought it would be extremely valuable to talk to some people that have actually done it. So Chris, we're glad you're here. Why don't you tell me a little about your background and then kind of walk me through your airline transition?
Yeah, Aaron, thanks for having me today. Really glad to have this opportunity to talk to some other FedEx brethren and people who are on the fence who might just need that extra nudge. Quick background, I was coming off my instructor tour as a T-45 instructor in 2020. My old man was at Delta. It was where I was supposed to be. And I remember the world going crazy early 2020. All the hiring dried up, so still getting off active duty. Went to Atlas for a year and a half and flew 767s, which was actually a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it and said, hey, maybe freight's for me. During my time there, got hired at FedEx summer of 21, and a few months later hired at Delta. And as most of you know, FedEx was the, hey, don't call us, we'll call you. Did I imagine that phone call? Delta was like, hey, you're hired. Let's go get in class. So I had to take that one. So went to Delta, classed up in late 21. And completed indoc and then had several weeks off before simulators. Right about that time was when FedEx had that big system bid with real junior upgrades, big movement. Things were booming, coming off the COVID high. My friends there from the squadron and elsewhere were having a really good time. So it seemed like a pretty safe place to be. The passenger airlines were still kind of healing from the 2020s and then those wounds there. So made a really, really tough decision to leave Delta right after indoc to go to FedEx. And I remember that decision being really hard. Like I couldn't eat the day I resigned from Delta. I was kind of upset about it. Grew up around Delta with my old man. Kind of this buzz that, hey, FedEx is a better place. Our family friends there have done well. My squadron mates have done well there. Nice big wide body fleet. You'll have a great career there. It's safe, especially the events of 2020. So I ended up leaving and starting at FedEx there in January of 2022. So big decision, bit off a lot there. Was hoping for, all my buddies on the 777 or the MD. Seemed like that was a good deal. I'd flown the 76 previously. But as I drove to Memphis, I realized I got the A300 and then the life that entailed. So that was my life at FedEx. And then from there, please ask away.
Okay. So you never hit the line then at Delta the first time. You left indoc?
Correct. And I think that helped me later because I didn't really burn the full bridge maybe. And I know some people have and have been able to go back. So no, I think I tried to do them a favor and be like, hey, don't waste the assets on me. I gave them a full 2 weeks notice, which they were very gracious about. Actually, I would say they almost weren't surprised because people have always left Delta for FedEx. But I just encountered people being very gracious and saying, hey, thanks for playing. You've got to do what's best for you, but absolutely no negativity. And in fact, it almost hurt because everyone was so nice about it.
I can tell you that back in the 2000s after the Great Recession, a friend of mine that was a F-15 squadron commander left Delta ultimately to go to Southwest. He'd been in the pool at Southwest Delta or at FedEx and Southwest, went to Delta, got through IOE, was flying 75 for Delta when Southwest finally called. And one of the things that I think influenced his decision to leave Delta was really strong peer pressure. A lot of his circle had gone to Southwest. His mentors, the late 90s or 2000s as they retired, had gone there, and they were absolutely, cultish is one negative connotation. But look, they were proud of their company. They loved it. And they're like, you got to come in here and drink this Kool-Aid. This is a great place to work. This is so much fun. We'll be playing golf in Vegas. We'll be having a great time. And unfortunately, as soon as he left, it seems like Southwest hit a long, steady kind of flat spot there, the AirTran merger and things like that. What was it that you were hearing about FedEx? I know the point that I wanted to make was when he actually went to turn in his equipment, his hat, his manuals, they didn't really know what to do because at the time, nobody quit Delta. So obviously later in the 20-teens, 2020s, they did have people leaving to come to FedEx. So they probably had a little bit more expectation that happened every once in a while. But back when my friend did it, it was a very rare occurrence. But back to your friends, what was it that they were telling you about FedEx? What was the Purple Siren song that pulled you over?
It's interesting from peers and then from my dad's generation as well that were, closer to the retirement side, hearing both sides of it. Everybody shouts pension, which we know how that all ended up on the passenger side. Nobody has those anymore. Wide body flying, interesting places, long trips, security, wide body pay scales, and especially with the events of 2020, good job security because freight always seems to need to move. And then plus some of the big movement that was happening at FedEx, during COVID, seemed like guys were making a lot of money. There was a lot of movement and some opportunity for some progression. It seemed like airplanes were coming. And in the midst of all that, there was buzzes of, hey, they're going to hire to 7,000 or 8,000 pilots. It seemed like there was a lot of movement going, and that seemed very stable. And not to say Delta wasn't. I would say out of all the legacies, Delta seemed the safest. But the passenger carriers had certainly taken a beating. And I'd watched my dad get furloughed after 9/11. I'd seen bankruptcy, 65, and his generation go through all of that. Some of our family friends who were, very senior on the triple, in their 60s had lived great lives and seemed to be, have good money, good lifestyle, deviation bank, double deadheads, a lot of things that seem very gentlemanly about it. And I feel like it's kind of the smoke and mirrors thing, the Kool-Aid, like you said. It's hard to get full disclosure on both sides because every airline has their pluses and minuses. So I feel like maybe some people don't have the truth in reporting, or maybe the squadron syndrome, where a lot of people come straight from active duty to that, and that's all they know. And it's the best thing ever because it's certainly better than being on active duty. So yeah, probably a rosy picture of that. And I think some people certainly it is exactly the bill that fits them, and they get the 777 out of Indoc, and they have lived a very good life the whole time. So those were the kind of things I was hearing.
That makes sense. I think one of the things that sometimes happens too when people compare airlines, we've got some trauma victims from the airline industry. Right. Sure. In 1992, Delta had their first furlough. It was a small furlough, a few hundred pilots. But a lot of people felt like that kind of created a new culture or break a promise or an implied promise. Your father worked under Leo Mullen for a while, who had a very, I'd say people probably thought about him like maybe some of the discussions at FedEx we hear about Raj now, a lot of negative backlash. And then certainly 9/11 disproportionately affected the passenger carriers. There were furloughs and things like that. Furloughs could be extremely traumatic. One future podcast I'm going to do, though, is on people that have been through furloughs in that era. And as an interview coach, I found many of them, when they talked about the experiences, everybody seemed to find a way to survive. Everybody seemed to find a way to bounce back. And I don't dismiss the lack of job security or the trauma of a furlough as insignificant. But I also got the impression from people who have been through it that, hey, it wasn't as terrible as I expected. If you've never experienced that, though, or if job security is number one, I could see how, they've never furloughed like Southwest or FedEx. That would have a strong appeal, the implied security. Certainly. When you showed up at FedEx, did you feel like your decision was immediately validated, or were there some red flags where you kind of questioned your decision? So you're in Indoc, you've left your red and blue wings behind, you've turned in your double-breasted blazer, you're in purple Indoc, probably 2-3 months after you've been in Delta Indoc. What stuck out at you at the time?
Definitely very welcoming culture, an aura of, hey, you've made it. This is the best job, the last job you're ever going to need. Welcome to the family. A lot of heavy stories of people trying really hard to get there. Big positive for FedEx is that room of people at Indoc was a lot of heavy hitters, a lot of wing kings, colonels, some people who've done some real stuff in the military, and then anybody on the civilian side, line check airmen, people who've been captains for a long time. FedEx certainly vets and hires some heavy hitters, and you really got to give it to them there. Not to say anything else about the other airlines, but it seemed like the group of people I interviewed with and I started with were some pretty select individuals. So I felt lucky to be part of that. So the hardest part about switching for me was divorcing the sentimentalness of it all. Like people are like, don't worry about that. You got to think about your future here. Don't be sentimental about Delta. And I was trying to walk away from that. That was very hard. So if anything, I could tell your viewers is, hey, listen to your heart. If something's telling you, you're doing the wrong thing, listen to it. So I still had that kind of gnawing on my gut a little bit. But being an indoc, obviously, good foot forward to the company. But I knew enough about the airlines. I wish I had the FOM maybe in the contract before I showed up there. And I started kind of looking at some things. I'm like, ooh, these work rules aren't that good, actually. RA, RB, substitution, like what are these things? Why do these exist? And the union was in contract openers at this point, and we're looking at them and I'm reading them. I'm like, wow, this is all you guys are asking for? Retirement? Like that pulled the highest. And I even noticed their scope wasn't part of that. And having come from Atlas, who now Atlas CEO is at FedEx, knowing very well what they can play on games with weak pilot working agreements, that started to worry me right there. But I realized that just from looking at that and knowing the games they can play, that maybe the ask on this contract opener wasn't going to be good. I tried to put those feelings away and just go with it. But just something in my gut kind of told me that was not going to be a good time. But hey, press forward and made it through INDOC and then through training, no issues. Again, top caliber people, certainly on the flight ops side to work with. So that's something I'll always give a point to FedEx for and will always miss.
But you'd already had 7.6 experience at Atlas. So you'd made that transition from military buffoon like I was to, okay, solid co-pilot, crew member, multi-crew airplane. I think it's worth mentioning that, that's not always an easy transition for people.
No.
The guys that come in from the regionals that already speak fluent 121, well, they're just learning to fly a bigger airplane. But at least for guys with our backgrounds, that's actually a bit of a challenge. But you mentioned you had no problems with the Airbus trend. Tell me about your first, year on the line with the bus. Were you on reserve? Were you a line holder? And also, were you a commuter during all this experience?
Yeah, great questions. IOE was fantastic. Both at Line Check Airmen were just awesome guys. Really, really enjoyed it. And that was that almost fanned the flames a little bit. Like, okay, I made a good decision. These guys are great. And if I'm going to be flying with guys like this, I'm set. Settled into reserve life. And then I think I peaked at maybe 80% there, maybe on the bus in Memphis. So really the only lines I could hold were kind of just 3 days on, 2 off, really non-commutable, and hub turns pretty much. So I did a lot more reserve. Plus I was still balancing mill leave. So I had that to kind of contend with as well. So yeah, a lot of RA, RB. Tried the R24 game once and was rewarded with hotel standby. So never did that again. And I was a commuter the whole time from Jacksonville, Florida. So at the time, we had 2 7.6s a day to get there. Those booked up pretty quick. Obviously, heavy Navy contingent here commuting. So I found myself on Delta quite a bit on a 2-leg commute to Atlanta. The domestic guys don't seem to get a huge deviation bank like the international guys do, but I would get a little bit here and there and could buy a ticket to get to work on occasion. But I still dealt with the realities of commuting quite a bit, and then commuting in, landing at 10 at night on the beginning of the sort there, and then starting at 2 a.m. rotation when I did do a line.
What percentage of your flying do you think? And I know you've done freight with Atlas before, but of the night-day delineation line, what percentage were you working backside of the clock? And I know you were junior on the bus, but approximate percentage.
90% of the time. Occasionally would get a good day, Boise, return, something like that. But usually nighttime, hub turn to Fort Myers or to Shreveport or Fargo, that kind of thing. Sometimes you'd be rewarded with a day return or something like that. But yeah, it was 80 to 90%.
Were you, as you looked at your benefits, you've been through INDOC for both. One of the things I've always heard is that FedEx Healthcare is outstanding. Unfortunately, I've got to test that a few times with a couple of back operations, and I had daughters that were cheerleaders that found a way to break a bone periodically. So we've appreciated the buy-up plan there and put that to good use. For most of my career, I felt like I've kind of been compensated in the top band
of our industry. I haven't felt like I've been looking up until recently. What was your perception of the pay and benefits when you got in at getting hired in 2021? Were you satisfied? Were you excited about any of it? Were there even then shortfalls that were apparent to you?
I can't speak to the healthcare because I've been on TRICARE still as a reservist. So it seems like the people I worked with that were on it seemed to have no complaints on that part. With regards to pay, it was hard to get ahead on the domestic fleet here. Obviously commuting was hard to pick up something draft. 401k stuff, obviously the B fund is much lower at FedEx versus some of the peers. So that was kind of moving along. Obviously the dangled carrot of the pension waiting for you, but that's a check that you won't cash for a long time. Hourly and where I was going at the time, the majors hadn't signed new contracts. They were certainly in the hunt. So it seemed like that was on par. It was certainly a little better than Atlas. But where it really got interesting was things like, hey, a sweep flight, you're ducking into Madison to get some freight, 30 minutes of pay, so now the disruptions and things, which happened a decent amount, weren't really paying good money, or getting into substitution and other things. So that was kind of eye-opening when you worked pretty hard for the month and then you looked at your pay stub, you're like, I thought I worked harder than this. I think I kind of ran a little short, before everybody else moved the chains. But obviously now, like you said, looking up, once the big three moved the chains, it was a big difference there. I'm like, man, this flying a wide body at night on the backside of the clock, which was supposed to be good pay for that pretty varsity flying, I would argue, especially some of the places we go. And my buddies are making more money flying a 7.3 during the day, on a leisurely Florida turn.
Well, comparison is the thief of joy is what some people will tell you. But I would also say pragmatically, if you don't know what your compensation band is across the industry, you don't know what to ask for, and you need to be aware. Certainly the flying at FedEx, especially as a junior guy on reserve, is going to be some of the more challenging and more onerous pairings. When did the little light bulb go off on the back of your head that maybe I should leave here? And how did that come about?
Man, that's the big one. And I carried that bear for a long time. I'd say an NDOC because of my feelings towards missing Delta and seeing kind of some lackluster things about FedEx there. I just put that in the map case and said, hey, deal with it. It's going to be fine. My buddies on the triple said, hey, system bid, next one, you'll come over here, or the MD, you'll get, life will get a little bit better. And not to sound like I didn't do my homework, and I did do my homework on it. I realized the domestic fleet at FedEx is very different than the international wide body. And I figured, hey, bide your time, it will get better, promise. But I'd say about halfway during my time there, and a couple of things happened. So hiring was supposed to be, 7,000, 8,000 people. When I got the call for the class, I was asked, do you know how senior you're going to get? And I was like, wow, this is going to be great. So hiring started tapering off, and then it looked like they were going to stop. Fred stepped down, and the airline started restructuring into Drive 2.0, which still nobody knows what those things are. It seemed like things were starting to slow down real quick, and I said, I'm going to be stuck here on RA for a very long time. Plus, I was jump seating on Delta all the time. They had gotten a new contract. Seniority was moving very quickly, and people from my original class were being able to hold captain, and they were making good money on a new contract, and I have no one to blame but myself for that. But I regretted it every day, especially when I rode on Delta, looking at that right seat or even that left seat going, hey, that would be me had I not left. So that was a gnawing feeling in my guts. And, I didn't tell few people except some friends I was thinking about going back. That was probably the right answer.
Were there any family ramifications when he came to the kitchen table and said, guess what, honey, I made a boo-boo. I want to turn around and go back?
No, I'm bachelor. So my dogs really didn't care as long as they got fed. And I still had the reserve flying too with the Navy. So that was a huge support, which some people are lucky to have. And some people, your sole breadwinner, it's your only job. Those are two very different dynamics for sure. It was interesting finally telling my old man and some of my Delta friends that I was interested in coming back to Delta. The response was, wow, like you did all that. But a lot of the response from friends was, you know what, Chris, I'm shocked you ever left. Like, I hope you get called back. So that actually, I would say the reception to that was pretty positive. And that was before, the bad things really started happening at FedEx. That really made that decision very validated.
Was your decision when you were going to leave FedEx only to go back to Delta, or did you apply to American or United?
Delta only. Because of very strong feelings I had towards the company and where I wanted to be. And it was just every day, like I said, jump seating on Delta to and from work. If I drove to Memphis, I drive right into runway 1028 and see Delta, fly Delta jets from the highway. You can see that hangar. It was like trying to go back to a first love. And that was the only place I remotely wanted to go to. And a big fear of if they didn't take me back, what was next? I knew I needed to leave FedEx because I foresaw some very bad things happening. But I'm glad it worked out.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is the main catalyst, the things going through the back of your head. First of all, maybe it's not as shiny as I thought it was looking at the contract, looking at the FOM. We'll work through that. We were in contract negotiations. Stagnation's a big deal, though. You didn't think you'd be sitting reserve, first officer, Memphis-based, for extended periods. We all understand everybody's got to pay dues.
Sure.
So the expectations changed. And then just the reality of, night freight is it's a different animal. It's a little bit tough. How you were treated, what your reaction was to that. So that's an interesting insight.
It weighed heavily, and people talk trash about Atlas and places like that. And I was telling my crash pad roommates, a couple were former Atlas, were like, we got treated better at Atlas, actually. Like maybe the pay wasn't, amazing there, but we had amazing layovers and flew a lot of freight. But during the day, and even at night, you still kind of got treated a little bit better. So that was quite a stark reminder. And again, mileage may vary. My buddies on the triple, live a rock star life, and they probably shouldn't leave that. But those were all my personal factors, and some of my other friends probably saw none of those.
How long did it take for Delta to ring you back?
About 4 months from that point. So, I kept updating my app, and finally got an invite there to interview. I didn't have to take the COG test again, so I was given an interview invite in early March, and gave me a bunch of dates. One day it was a week later, so I said, "Let's do it." I've already been hired here once. Let's try it again. Ended up getting a coaching session with you all, just a quick top off to knock the rust off. But I figured, hey, let's do it live and get back in there. So hired back in early March, and then classed up in April of 23.
Fantastic. How were you treated in the second interview?
It went better than I could have ever expected. It really, and I had to coach myself to be, hey, walk in there with your hat in your hand, so to speak, and humility and kind of beg for forgiveness and explain what happened. So we went into the interview, same kind of setup with in this time it was 2 HR professionals and 1 captain, and I gave my same intro as previously as the last time I was hired, and then I said, hey, this is where things got a little different. And explained my really tough decision to leave Delta, and was very human about it. Talked to them about not being able to eat the day I resigned, like how hard I took that decision, and how hard it's been, how much I missed the Delta brand. And that wasn't Kool-Aid. I was sincere about it. But I stuck with the story on that, and then how much I wanted to be back, and kind of put a bow on it with that. And then from there, I really didn't have any other questions, because they have their questions they ask you, and we kind of went down the normal script. So the rest of the interview felt very similar to my previous one of, here's the tell me about it times and what would you do. So again, very, very gracious from them. And I concluded with a nice, hey, thank you for the opportunity to come back again. I'm wearing the same red tie I wore last interview that I got hired at. And I pulled out my wings from the first interview and said, was given these last indoc. I would like to wear them again. And I could see the smiles spreading across the room. And, I think I had it. So I remember going to lunch, before they tell you what happens. And I just was kind of sitting there shaking a little bit going, if this doesn't work, what now? It was, I just remember saying, hey, God's in control, and you did your best. And I remember going back to the interview area, and they start pulling some people out that didn't make it. And I just sat there stone cold, and finally they walked back with a stack of folders like previously and said congratulations. But a very neat touch this time was all the interviewers came out and congratulated us all. And my interviewers came over to me, and I just said, that was a fantastic interview. Welcome home. They could not have been more gracious. And I was kind of choking up at that opportunity at that moment.
I know when I've gotten calls from people, they're very, very concerned if they've left an airline about going back, how that reception is going to be. And, I said, early 2020, the world went a little crazy, right? COVID, the protocols, we didn't know where things were going. And it would make sense in many cases that people were looking for stability, and the scripts kind of changed. I said, I think that you're going to get a mulligan. I think they're going to be gracious as long as you approach it with a humble attitude. And your experience certainly validated that. That puts FedEx in a situation like Delta was back when my friend left. That's kind of new ground for them. People typically, in my experience here, 23 years, and as an interview coach, I'd say less than 10 people I know have folded the tent and left to go to other airlines. And now you were the start of maybe a kind of a wave of that going on. How were you treated, and how did you handle letting FedEx know that you were going to transition away?
Well, actually, so back to the interview part, the humility part and being willing to admit you did something wrong. And I framed it certainly in the context of COVID. And hey, people are still wearing masks on airplanes. The world was a bit loony then. And I think they understood that. But humility is the name of the game if you're trying to come back. And I heard from many people, including a former chief pilot, that they never hire people back. So when I have told people about it, they are shocked. So I'm not good, but I guess I'm good enough to get hired by Delta twice. So not awful. So with regard to the leaving FedEx part, I was probably one of the first five to seven people to leave. And a few of us talked, and, we didn't think we were crazy. We told each other we're doing the right thing. And, proofs validated that. A couple of them are sim instructors at United making big money. One just a little bit senior to me is a 7-1 captain already at Delta. And then several others are 7-3 captains at United. So the proof's been in the pudding. There still is life afterwards. The leaving part at FedEx, I thought I'd sign my death warrant as soon as I got hired, because a month before I got hired, a gentleman had also gotten hired at Delta and was terminated from FedEx for his PREA being pulled. I believe he was still on probation, but they just pulled the rug out from under him, and that was that. So I was fully prepared for that to happen to me. I was out on mill leave for a week or two, just staying busy, and received a phone call while I was flying. My cell phone buzzed and landed, and it was my fleet captain. But it was, hey, give me a call back. We got your PREA request from Delta. Don't worry, you're not fired. Call me back. So called him back, and he was extremely gracious and said, hey, got your PREA request. Understand you might be looking to leave. Just send me a letter with your dates. Make sure you butt your dates up to your first date at Delta. No harm, no foul. You're not fired. Us fleet captains went to HR and said, hey, you can't do this to our guys. It's a bad look. So, I think from the fleet captain side and from everybody else I've heard anecdotally, the fleet captains are very gracious about it. And I wouldn't say there was any blame, scorn. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Again, very, very smooth. I'd say HR side, the PAC didn't know how to handle it. I'm sure they're very polished now on how to accept those things.
Yeah. Well, it's new ground. And as an interview coach, I've watched airlines go through hiring cycles, and then I've watched them hit flat spots and people leave. Nobody used to leave Southwest to go other places. And then in the mid 20 teens, all of a sudden people were going, well, I'm going across the street to American or Delta. And typically the machinery that's designed to do that hasn't been lubed or used before. So I do think it's worth mentioning. Yeah, there were definitely some rough spots with the first guys that left, guys that on probation, but our fleet captains stood up for our guys and tried to fix that. And that's worth mentioning. I have a lot of respect for them trying to fix the problem. Personally, I think the problem never should have happened. I'm not giving HR a pass on that, but it was nice to see the folks that we come in contact with advocating for us so quickly.
Absolutely. And Trey Hollingsworth, my fleet captain, very gracious. I really no problems with anybody at FedEx, flight ops wise, fleet captain below for sure. All guys just like you and I.
Okay. So let's recap for just a minute. How long were you at FedEx?
That would have been 16 months ultimately.
Okay. So you spent 4 months at least on second year pay.
Correct.
Wide body FO. How long have you been back at Delta now?
Just shy of 2 years. So 1 month ago. So 23 months.
Okay. So you've had year two pay at both places. The question a lot of our pilots are going to ask, how's that working out economically?
First year wasn't, as big of a hit as I had thought. I was ready for it. Granted, I had the benefit of, a Navy Reserve job to kind of pad that. So I pedaled a little harder there. But I pedaled pretty hard at Delta as soon as I got there. And Training pay at Delta is very good. Like all the big three now, you'll basically receive 80 hours or so. So basically guarantee in training plus per diem the entire time. So you actually kind of take a pay cut once you're off training because your per diem drops off a little bit, depending on what your flying is. Hotels are paid for. So again, that attitude, you'll see this be in the first days. The attitude of you're lucky to be here, $4,000 a month and no hotel covered, which is what I got in Memphis, versus $8,000 a month maybe and a hotel covered. Two very different things. So financially, it didn't really sting as bad. And once I was released to the line, I flew a bunch just to get consolidated, get off probation, which at Delta probation is a year or 400 hours. So I pedaled pretty hard. I think I beat probation off by maybe a month early because I was working hard at it. Some guys get off of it, 8 months because they work hard. But you can make more money there, and there's plenty of opportunity, plenty of straight time trips or some premium if you're good. Second year, I have blown FedEx out of the water by far. And my pay scales now as a 737 first officer are pretty comparable right now to what I was making at FedEx within a few dollars. But I'm crediting 80, 90 hours a month, and I don't feel like I'm sweating very hard to do it. So the financial movement has been upward. Profit sharing has been fantastic because you have an incentive to work hard because it will pay out very well on Valentine's Day.
Okay. One thing I will make clear to listeners, all these airlines have airlines within airlines. For instance, I'm Oakland based. I fly deadheads to Asia. I operate intra-Asia, and then I come back. I'm not sure there's an airline in the world that can offer that kind of experience. And I know I'm lucky, but I've been here 23 years. And the question for guys in your situation, year 1, 2, 3, 4 is, am I ever going to get there from here? And is it worth the tax I pay, the circadian disruptions? So we talked about the pay a little bit. Tell me about your days off, how you feel, circadian issues, how you manage your commute and compare the two. As a relatively junior pilot, kind of compare the lifestyle a little bit. Share your thoughts.
Great question, Aaron. I just even the line of being on the line at FedEx for the bit of time I was, I'd sleep manage, but it would kill me for a day afterwards coming back off a 4 or 5 day hub turn. And again, stagnation, you realize you're going to be doing this forever. You're not going to get that good Oakland base or that 777 life and get some change. Which wide body everywhere is going to be circadian disruptions. Got it, but hub turn flying, the traditional FedEx is not a way to live if you're going to be stagnant. But it would take me a day or two to recover from a FedEx trip. Delta, nothing. I actually like flying red eyes on occasion because they're very commutable and people don't want them. So they're actually really good trips. I do one red eye a month and I'm fine. But it took me probably 4 months into my Delta career to stop waking up at 3 a.m. My body was just getting me up at 2 or 3 a.m. every day. And that was only from being on the line a year at FedEx. Imagine, 20 years of that. So circadian rhythm stuff, no problem. On the 7.3 Delta, I've seen Anchorage all the way down to Aruba and everywhere in between, but no big circadian swaps. And again, like I said, I'll do a red eye because people don't want to do them, and that's not even that big of a punishment. With regards to like your good lifestyle in Oakland, 7.6 or the triple guys, the carrot of eventually getting there, it's the pay your dues thing maybe. And then that's the thing for every airline, unless you have a really high social at FedEx or Delta. But I've never felt that at Delta, not a single day. I mean, sure, I'd like to go do something else later, but I'm 50-something% on the 737 already with 2 years in the company and getting amazing commutable trips. But there's never been a carrot dangled of, hey, put in your dues and you'll get this. I've flown with captains who are furloughed, who experienced extreme stagnation in the 2000s, and I've never gotten the pay your dues line or the anything like that. They're always just, hey, we hope you have it better than we did. And a lot of the contract successes we have are born on their backs, the backs of my dad's generation, but never an attitude of that. Meanwhile, I did fly with a few salty captains at FedEx who would say, hey, you got to pay your dues around here. I was on the panel for 3 years. You're lucky you get a window seat. Had a captain tell me, hey, screw new hires. You got yours. We don't need to pay them during training. You need to think about your pension. And it really kind of caustic from some of them, but never really had that here. But with regards to my trips being commutable, I'm home right now. I had 18 hours between trips, decided to come home, and I'm going back out again because the commute for me is so easy with 10 flights a day back and forth between Florida, Jacksonville, and Atlanta. So my trips, I like being on 5 days because that's less commuting, but I'll do it 2 a day here and there. So my schedule flexibility, and that by virtue of being one of 500 something 737 FOs in Atlanta, gives me a lot more flexibility to do what I want. And there's a lot more trips in the pot. I don't seem to ever fly anything I'm sad about.
Well, one of the big marketing pushes that I've always heard pilots give pilots about working at FedEx has been the ease of commute. When you had multiple jump seats coming in every day around the country, you could almost always reserve it. You could reserve it 3 weeks out. No harm, no foul if the flight gets canceled. That sounds really good. Just in the last week, I've been doing some experiments. I maintain 2 homes. I'm in Florida, taking care of my mom some of the time, and then out in the Salt Lake area. And every time I've checked the Salt Lake jump seat, we're down to 1 flight now with what used to be sometimes 3, definitely 2. They're full. The ease of commute that people expect here has eroded as our system form has changed a little bit. Why am I bringing that up? We're not hiring right now, but everything goes in cycles. We'll be hiring again. When I had people asking me in the mid 20 teens, should I leave Delta? Should I leave United to come to FedEx? My buddies say it's great. One big piece of advice I always gave them was, look, you've already got an ID. You can list on our jump seats. You look at some of the trips the guys fly junior and go fly them. Everybody says, the week on, week off hook turn thing. I think I'd be great at that. Go do one. Mm-hmm. And I say that not leading the question. I've never enjoyed that kind of flying. It's always been, I find it repetitious, uncomfortable. I did a little bit of it, Salt Lake to Oakland during COVID because it was sort of the least bad alternative. And I was actually senior enough. For the first time in my FedEx career, I could hold my hometown line, which was actually, that was not terrible. But I can't say I relished it. There are people who absolutely thrive on that. It works very well for them. A lot of people with small kids at home like it because they come home in the morning, take kids to school, whatever, they sleep midday. I'm not here to say it's better or worse. What I will say is you need to be an informed consumer.
Absolutely.
And for those of you considering following Chris, he said, well, they fly 70 block hours, so their layovers might be shorter. I'll let him address that. In full disclosure, I have a daughter at Delta, and she's probably in Cancun twice a month. She lays over in Denver, where her husband is an instructor in the United Schoolhouse, and they have an apartment there. So she'll bid trips to Denver and actually be with her husband when he comes out of the simulator. They're able to make this work. What I tell people is go try it on. And if you're at FedEx now, go, I think I'd like this. Jump seat, talk to your buddies, go fly a simulated leg or 2 with them and go, what do you think of it? It's a great opportunity once you've got that ID and you're in the CAS system to actually try this on. And I'm amazed at how few people actually do that before they make a leap somewhere. That's not going to give you the full picture of everything to do with the company culture, but it'll give you a pretty healthy glimpse, right? And certainly a chance to talk to crews and get their perspective to be a fairly informed consumer. You mentioned, and I've heard a little of the same stuff. Hey, I came here, I carried the water jug, I was an engineer. I don't know if that's prevalent at all airlines. You've implied you don't get much of that vibe at Delta, but can you talk a little about how do you feel about having worked for having the FedEx MEC and then Delta or the Delta MEC, not Delta, excuse me, but the Delta Alpha MEC. Do you see any major difference in the culture, in the tone of communications, in the advocacy? What would you say one's a stronger union group than others, or how would you describe it, having worked for both?
I would say Delta is far stronger. I wasn't at Delta during the heady days of the contract negotiations and how much work they put into that, but they delivered a pretty good contract that passed by a pretty overwhelming majority, which paved the way for United and American to move the chains as well on that one for the industry. I really Sure, people can find something to complain about. I don't have anything to complain about. The work rules are very good, I think, and for me personally. One big thing here is disruption. So I mentioned at FedEx, you get 30 minutes for landing if you go do a sweep. At Delta, I pray to get disrupted. I pray for a reroute because they always work out. And there is so much teeth to that in our contract that we get paid so much extra money and a positive space ticket home if you release after your time. Like, there are things that make it not painful. So again, it goes back to I look at my Delta pay stub every month. I go, wow, this actually was pretty good. So that's just one example there. But we have good scope. We have hourly rates. We have things that are very well defined. And I think our pilot working agreement is much stronger. Whenever I've had a grievance for a pay thing or something they did, it is very quickly responded to, and they find a way to close it pretty quick. And maybe not so much on the union side. When I need help at Delta from something, I can chat with somebody there at the company who's designed to answer questions. It's called Pilot Assist. And if I've got a problem that they can't fix, I go to Chief Pilot. Like, there's all these lifelines. I don't have to insight it and wait for something and then deal for months with a expense report problem. There's no expense reports or credit cards at Delta, by the way. So I feel like the union's got my back on things, and then the company does too. But I don't feel adversarial with the company at all to begin with. I know the guys at FedEx Alpa are working hard, but I didn't feel like they could hold the company accountable to things. And contract enforcement, I know those guys work hard, but I feel like the company can just walk all over them on things. And then the loopholes in the contract that they can exploit, like R24, turning that in hotel standby, the things that should be closed, I don't think they're focusing on, or at least were in TA 1.0, where they were just trying to deliver some big retirement plan, for the senior guys. So I do feel like DALPA represents, the junior to the senior as best you can. And again, that's not Kool-Aid, but I have no complaints there.
Well, there is a certain amount of apples to oranges. It is a different business in some respects, but it is true right now. We have taken a lot of our support staff and outsourced it, downsized it. Passports, you used to drop your passport off. You'd get a passport back 2 weeks later with whatever visas you needed. You had to fill out paperwork with assistants and all that, but it get done. We've kind of been asked to do that on our own now, largely. It's we still have, I think, one person working in the passport office, but if they're sick, out. I think they're out this week with COVID, for instance. You're kind of on your own. Just this month, I had almost $7,500 missing from a check with no affiliated expense reports or anything that should have done that. All my expense reports for the last year have been closed out with very nominal, small amounts, one way or the other. So, it's a glitch. But as you mentioned, the onus is on the pilot to track the glitch down, and that involves an insight, basically a glorified email system, and you wait for a response. There is no bat phone. I will say our fleet captains are good typically about if you do call them, but you do get the sense they're overwhelmed at times, simply because, and we've experienced this in the military too sometimes, when people start to cut support staff and try to shift things down to computer-based systems, inevitably somebody's going to find something that goes through the cracks that doesn't quite fit on this computer program, and you end up with these problems. So that is an irritant. I wouldn't say it's a reason to leave. I wouldn't say it's a reason not to come here, but I do think it's one of those things. If I'm a pilot and I'm lucky enough to have a couple of opportunities, I'm going to ask some hard questions. And that's that gray area work, the stuff. Hey, how much time do you spend taking care of little administrative things? Might be, a factor in your decision at some point. And I know many people would scoff that and say, well, hey, job security is the big thing. I think we've proven the job security, there's no guarantees, right? We've seen Atlas is laid off. FedEx has reduced hour guarantees. Contracts get moved, things get changed. There's big concerns about outsourcing. So my recommendation, and I've had this conversation probably with 100 pilots in the last year. What do I do? Where do I go? Do I stay? Do I jump? Do I follow Chris to Delta? Do I follow Corey to Atlanta? Do I ride this out? I remind people, go have a conversation with the guy in the mirror. Do you like this job? Is your goal to be a 777 pilot flying around the world? Is it worth hanging on a few years? Is that something you really want to do? And maybe the answer is absolutely it is. Do you like the ability to have a 10, 12-day single departure line and have a couple of weeks off? If that's really important to you, maybe it's worth the wait. Conversely, if you've got kids at home and you go, I don't really want to be gone 10 days. I'd much rather be out a couple of days and back. If you live in a domicile or close to a major hub, or like you live in Jacksonville, but you all get 10 flights a day. I think the big thing you have to do is be very honest with yourself and not listen to people saying, oh, this is a good job or this is a crap job, but ask them the hard questions like, tell me about your job. Chris, show me your calendar. How did you make this work? And when you say things like, well, I left Atlanta last night to come home to do a podcast, to play with my dogs, to grab some fresh food from home, I'll be going back on an afternoon jump seat to go back to work. Somebody might go, well, that sounds pretty awesome. Somebody else might go, well, that sounds like a lot of stress. So it comes down to the individual and the decision that they have to make about, is this going to be the best fit for you? So looking back, what do you think the biggest upsides have been to you returning to Delta and leaving FedEx?
It's one size does not fit all in this industry. And for some things you can see all the roses, or for the downsides, it's death by a thousand cuts. And like you talk about expense reports, things like that, you find the things that annoy you, the things that don't. So my commuter life might, somebody might be like, hey, who cares? I want to live in domicile. So that argument is completely invalid and it doesn't help them. So I didn't apply to other airlines either because of, notwithstanding my family connection to Delta, but, Delta just fit me better with location living in the South, like United wouldn't necessarily have. The upsides, Delta, to answer your question, there's been movement. We're hiring. That could obviously always stop at some point. The industry is weird. There's something for everybody at Delta, I think. And even as a junior FO, even my buddies are super junior on the 717 still have a good life. And even on reserve, I was only on reserve a few months. It was not punishment. There are ways you can make reserve actually very good at Delta. So my upsides for that are good quality of life, good schedule. I can do trips the way kind of I want to trade them out to be, with some flexibility, and good compensation, good culture. I feel like we deliver good product, and we're very much on the way up, and I hope it keeps going that way. There are a lot of people who fly freight that hate being with people and don't want to fly passengers, and good for them. That works for them. I'm a social person. I like wearing the hat in the airport, and I like handing out trading cards. That works for me. You talked about flying a lot. I do block a decent amount, 600-700 a year, which that's over double what you do at FedEx, but I like flying, and it's fun. That's what I signed up for. And a 96-hour layover somewhere isn't necessarily fun, if it's in Fargo or somewhere. But I'm on this trip I'm returning on. I'm going down to Punta Cana for 24 hours and Nashville for 24 hours. So am I really flying that much on that trip? So you mentioned Cancun. I was there last week, and Aruba a few weeks before that. So there is certainly a lot of variety and a lot of upsides to going to work. So I really can't find a lot to complain about. There just isn't. And
I probably spend a ridiculous amount of my own money flying my own airplane in my time off, right? I go to work to make money and pay to do what I do professionally. So I'm like you. I love to fly. One observation I've had is that when I'm flying with the sun on my face, I'm crisper. I feel like I'm a better pilot. I'm more engaged with the other crew member. I'm enjoying looking out the window. I've spent 23 years here. I've spent a good bit of that time on the backside of the clock, but due to the kind of flying I was able to hold, postal stuff, some day international, I do enjoy the day flying, and everybody's got their own ratio. I would say that, I may fly more block, but some of my favorite legs that I currently fly are Narita, Singapore, which is a 6 or 7 hour flight, sometimes 8. But it's a daylight flight, and I'm looking out over the Western Pacific Ocean, and I'm enjoying it. Penang, Taipei is another leg that we often fly in daylight hours, and I've remarked many times, gee, it's a lot of fun to fly, but I don't feel like hammered shit. So I'm not as concerned about the number of block hours as the conditions when I'm flying. Again, your miles may vary. Every pilot's got a different chemistry and a different way of dealing with circadian disruptions. Anything about FedEx now that you're gone that you missed? Were there things that you look back, go, it'd be nice to have that here, or I enjoyed that?
I didn't have much of a deviation bank being on the domestic fleet. That was nice for some flexibility, sure. And I could see a wide body guy, how that's a really good weapon, a tool to get to and from work. So that's kind of cool, but with them messing with it, maybe not. I do miss maybe a little more of a squadron atmosphere there at FedEx. And as you can attest to, a lot of my Navy buddies are there. A lot of guys, be call signs on the trip. It just a little tighter of a group in that regard because it's just not as big of an airline as 17,000 pilots at one of the big three. So I do miss that, and that's not taking anything away from the legacy side. But FedEx was a tight group of some pretty good professionals. That I'll miss the group of people, but I can't say there's a lot else that I miss that Delta doesn't give me and better.
Okay. I'll ask two more questions and then we'll wrap this up. First one is there anything back about the transition process back that surprised you when you went back to Delta the second time?
Really nothing. I knew I was forfeiting, ultimately ended up being almost 3,000 seniority numbers. So, and I even mentioned that in the interview that I was okay with that. That goes back to that humility piece of being willing to say, hey, I've made a mistake. I'm willing to take a little setback. So nothing very surprising. I think reactivating my life, and I had the same employee number, but having to call the HR and be like, hey, I'm back. Can you reactivate all that? That took a few days. And I really had this feeling of, it's almost like leprosy. We're like, oh, I'm back. I'm a quitter. Like, what do they do with me? And you don't want to tell everybody about you going back. But when you do tell people, they're usually like, wow, that's impressive. Like, good for you. And I remember when I first came back, FedEx was just kind of humming along, and people were like, oh, that's interesting. Like, we've never really rehired people. People don't come here from FedEx. But now 2 years later, with many people leaving FedEx, and there's one or two in every NDOT class I hear. I think there was 5 in the last one. People are just actually quite surprising. They're like, wow, you made a good decision. Like, bad on you for leaving, but you made the right decision. Like, time has validated that. So that has very much surprised me. And again, how welcoming everybody was, getting re-onboarded, and just, welcome back to the family. No grudges. It's not like you're divorced and then you remarried again. So that was the surprising part. I was prepared for a little bit more of that feeling of leprosy or you made a dumb decision, but actually quite the opposite.
Well, I've told you privately, I thought the decision was extremely courageous and smart for you. And it has nothing to do with, well, you'll know at 60 or 65, who's going to die with the most money. It's not about, you might get furloughed. Maybe Delta's going to take a downturn sometime in the future. I personally think they're a well-oiled machine doing well. But the point is, what I complimented you on was you had the guts to look at your situation, recognize you weren't happy, and instead of becoming a cancer cell and sitting around and polluting the area around you and being real negative, you said, I think I need to fix this. It's going to involve a little bit of eating crow, going back to Delta. It might involve a little bit of financial hit, but I'm going to be honest with myself. And that's a courageous decision. And I commend you for making that. It can be equally courageous for somebody to go, I'm going to gut it out here and ride this out because my vision is I want to be, 7-6 captain at FedEx, living in Memphis and working in the training department. That's my goal. That's my dream. Great. Just be honest with yourself and take proactive steps to do that.
Absolutely.
Any advice you would give somebody who decides to follow you back and go, okay, I made a mistake. Maybe they were at Delta previously or United previously. Maybe they weren't at a legacy previously, but now they're thinking about making a leap. Closing shots. What would you tell them about the process?
When the people I did tell I was thinking about leaving, or when I was confirmed I was leaving, a few people said I was crazy and you'd get furloughed. You're going to fly a lot. You're going to be on a 737, all kinds of random stuff. And it was kind of a gamble then. But what do they say? The difference between genius and insanity is results. I got results as soon as I started flying to Delta, and every month I do. And I haven't had to wait for, that payback of, on the panel for 3 years and in my life to get better. So it is a big jump. It takes some guts, especially to go back to your respective carrier. As Corey went back to United after a much heftier seniority number loss than I did. It takes some guts, but you and what works for you. If you're on the fence about FedEx or going back to passenger carrier, maybe you weren't at a passenger carrier, that's a tougher one because things could certainly get better at FedEx. But if you're longing for your old passenger carrier or to go to another one, I would say do it. And you You won't really know till later, but I think you'll get some instant payback, once you get trained up and get flying. But it's up to you. And what one man's trash, another man's treasure on some things. But don't be afraid, and don't listen to people that will be naysayers and that will try to tell you it won't work out, because that jump takes a lot of guts, but I promise it works out better. And I still have another 25 years left in this career to enjoy it. And the sting of all the movement and going through training again and pay is just completely in the rearview mirror now. And I'll be on the beach in Punta Cana tomorrow, and I won't be thinking about that one bit. So if you're thinking of making that jump, don't hesitate. That is the biggest thing I could tell you.
Okay. Well, you've been very transparent and forthright. Thank you so very much for sharing your perspective. I hope this helps. I've had this conversation with so many people that I thought it'd be beneficial to kind of bring other people to the room and let them get a chance to hear it from the horse's mouth. We'll do this with some pilots probably from United, and those who've left maybe go to American and get their perspective as well for balance. But Chris, I can't thank you enough for helping us out, and appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Aaron. It was an honor to talk to you, and good luck to those thinking about making that leap.
Thank you for joining us today. This has been Cockpit Conversations with Aaron Hagan from Emerald Coast Interview Consulting. Have some ideas for future interesting episodes? Contact us at emeraldcoastinterviewconsulting.com with your ideas and inputs. We look forward to hearing from you.